On the 11th of September, 4 groups of terrorists, totaling 19 people, hijacked 4 planes. Later, this terrorist attack became one of the most tragic and significant events of our time, not only for Americans, but for the whole world. Of the 4 planes, only 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers. The 3rd plane crashed into the Pentagon building. The fate of the 4th plane turned out differently. Initially, it was supposed to fly to the Capitol building in Washington. But the passengers of the plane resisted the invaders. As a result, the 4th liner did not reach the final goal, and at day 03 it fell into a field in Pennsylvania. The heroic actions of the passengers of United Airlines Flight 93 prevented hitting the target on the territory of the United States. Yes, this is the very flight where the invaders were resisted. Both towers of the World Trade Center, North and South, collapsed due to the blows. The study officially confirmed that the buildings of the towers collapsed due to caused fires and structural damage. Many people believe that the building could not collapse due to damage and fire. In the 2017, there was a myth about laying bombs in the basement of skyscrapers, but this fact remained a myth. An article was published in the alleged confession of a CIA agent about laying explosives on the lower floors. Soon Vesti confirmed that the article does not have any truth. Did you know that the collapse of the 2nd tower took only about 10 seconds, when the collapse of the first 47 seconds? Speaking of the victims, the exact number is unknown, but experts put forward the sum of 2,997 people, including passengers, crew members, and rescuers. If we talk about the age of the victims, it ranged from 2 to 85 years. About 70 to 80% of the victims were men. Kristen Lee Hansen became the youngest victim of the terrorist attack. She was 2 years old. She was on board one of the ill-fated planes that crashed into the towers. Kristen Lee Hansen was the smallest, and Robert Norton was the oldest. He also flew in one of the hijacked airliners. At the time of his death, he was 82 years old. As of August 2000 of the 17th year, only 60% of the remains of the victims were positively identified. 1,113 people out of 2,753 still have no biological confirmation of death. The events of the 11th of September have become the theme for many books, films, documentaries, and works of art. Examples of such works are the book Windows to the World by the famous author Frederick and the film Twin Towers, 2006 years. Operation Clear Skies is a code name for attacks used by terrorists before starting operations. According to statistical estimates, the organization of the terrorist attack cost $500,000. The terrorist attack broke all records for damage. It is estimated that the attack caused damage to infrastructure in the amount of at least $10 billion. And 2 million tons of garbage took 3 million hours of cleaning. Cleaning was finally completed only 6 months later on the 30th of May 2000 of the 2nd year. But firefighters also had a hard time, because it took 100 days to extinguish all the fires around Ground Zero. Did you know that as a result of the collapse, works of art worth $100 million, a memorial plaque to the victims of the bombing of '93, and paintings by Pablo Picasso were destroyed? All this was destroyed. Who was very unlucky, because just 6 months before the destruction of the towers, the developer bought a 99-year lease of the World Trade Centers for $3 and $2 billion. Many phone calls from passenger planes helped to transmit information about what was happening to the ground. Thanks to them, several thousand lives were saved. It's no secret to anyone but the events of the 11th of September became the deadliest terrorist attack in the history of mankind. The buildings of the World Trade Center were destroyed in less than 2 hours after the strikes, which indicates a good strength of the building. After the destruction, the airspace over the United States was completely closed after the attack remained closed for several days. The planes that were in the air simply did not know where to land. Fortunately, Canada came to the rescue. All the planes successfully landed in Canada, and soon every passenger was provided with food and shelter. I wonder how much such pleasure cost Canada. The ban on airspace did not affect only one plane in Miami. Lawrence Van Sertim was bitten by a poisonous snake. There was not enough antidote, and he had to fly to another state. 2 fighters accompanied the board. An interesting case, Ben Sliney is a man who cancelled all flights on the 11th of September, but the interesting thing is that it was his first working day. Just imagine a man who just went to work, gave an order to close the US airspace. At this moment, scientists were not sitting in vain. During the ban on flights, they conducted experiments related to the effects of jet aircraft on the atmosphere. Did you know that the wreckage of buildings went to monuments all over the world? The monument Freedom stands at a height of 93 in New Jersey, is dedicated to the passengers of United Airlines Flight 93. In memory of the victims and heroes of the 11th of September, the Museum and Memorial of the 11th of September was erected in New York, where you can touch and feel the tragedy with your own hands. The New York Times wrote an article about each victim. They called the series Portraits of Grief. This is a very strong act on their part. The Al-Qaeda organization banned in the United States was identified as responsible for the attacks, which led to its prosecution. It took almost 10 years to find and take out the leader of the group, Osama bin Laden. But in the end, he was killed by American troops in the 2011 year. Until his death, a reward of $25 million was placed on his head. The event of the 11th of September was not the first attack on the World Trade Center. In 1993 of the year, there was an explosion that killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. One of the men responsible for the tragedy also played an important role in the explosion of 1993. Both attacks were committed by the same group. Initially, the purpose of the bombing of the 93rd year was to destroy the foundation of the first tower so much as to force it to fall on the second tower. They loaded the bomb into a truck that was parked in the lower parking lot of the building. Experts say that if the car was 9 meters closer to the foundation, the explosion carried out their plan. To hijack planes, hijackers were able to easily carry knives through the airport security system. But how they managed it is still not known. Did you know that the Russian sculptor Zurab Tsereteli presented the teardrop monument? It stands in Bayonne, New Jersey. The memorial to the victims of the 11th of September consists of 2 huge pools standing on the site of the Twin Towers. On their walls are the names of all those who died in the disaster. There are also the names of 10 pregnant women who died during the terrorist attack. The amazing fact is that on the 11th of September, several thousand Israelis. What was the consequence is still not known. Do you think they knew? Incredibly, 21 people survived the collapse of the towers. They were John McLaughlin and William Jimeno. They were rescued from the wreckage of the collapsed World Trade Center. The film World Trade Center was made about their miraculous survival in the year 2006. More than 3,000 children lost their parents during the terrorist attack on the 11th of September. As a result of the terrorist attacks, the global political and security landscape has been significantly changed. After the terrorist attack on September, the fight against terrorism became one of the main priorities of many countries and international organizations. Most of those killed in the attacks were US citizens, but among the victims were also citizens of more than 90 other countries. The dates of the 11th of September have become a symbol of unity, solidarity, and memory in the United States and the world. Every year, on the 11th of September in New York, 2 powerful searchlights are turned on at the place where the Wood Building stood. From all over the city in the evening, it will be possible to look at. A month after the disaster, a record amount of blood was collected for those in need. People fled from the city because of the dust, and the evacuation of people by water was the largest in the history of America. The terrorists have already tried to destroy both towers of the WUK, but it did not end with success. Surprisingly, some of the terrorists involved in the plot lived in the United States for more than a year and took piloting lessons inside the country. Others entered the country just a few months before the attack. 184 people were killed when the plane hit the Pentagon, including passengers and hijackers. The dates of the 11th of September have become a symbol of the memory of the victims, unity, and relentless fight against terrorism around the world. On the site of the destroyed towers of the World Trade Center, new skyscrapers were erected, One World Trade Center and others. Also, the new World Trade Center was opened on May 10, 2013. It was called the Freedom Tower. The height of the spire is 1,773 feet, which is a reference to the year when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Did you know that the destruction of the towers and the fear of new attacks led to a significant economic shift in the United States and the world? Probably because of fear, most American stocks fell by 2 or 3% on September 11th. After the first plane hit the tower, the people in the second tried to evacuate, but were forced to stay in their places at the request of the security service. Some tried to leave anyway, but were returned to their jobs. The investigation for many more days wanted to find out why and who gave the guard such an order is unknown. It could save many innocent victims. It is established that the passengers of Flight 93 broke into the cockpit, where there were already terrorists, with a fire extinguisher. When the plane crashed, all 44 people on board were killed. They had a chance, but luck was not on their side. It is known that it was not the ram that caused the destruction, but a fire caused by a fuel leak. Many experts are inclined that the materials had to withstand Gorenish fuel, but the answer was in furniture, paper, and other materials. The total temperature of the combustion was able to melt steel, which resulted in a crash. More than 400 dogs were involved in the search expedition. All over the world, people supported a minute of silence in memory of the victims of the 11th of September. Formula One racers turned off their engines, bells rang throughout Poland for several minutes, and there was silence on all channels. Public transport was stopped in many countries. Many heroic actions of rescuers and ordinary citizens were seen during the evacuation and rescue. One of them is firefighter Aurea Palmer. In total, the workers had to sift through more than 1 million tons of debris in search of remains and objects belonging to the victims of the terrorist attack. They found 447 hours and 144 wedding rings. Many people, realizing their hopelessness, jumped from the towers, and the speed of the jumper reached 93 miles per hour. One of these jumpers fell on a firefighter. The height of the World Trade Center was 417 meters. This is the fourth highest building in New York. There were about 17,000 people in the towers of the World Trade Center at the time of the ramming by planes. 3,000 of them died. The new World Trade Center will be $3 billion more expensive than the old one. A meeting was supposed to take place in one company on September 11th, but for some reason it was postponed the day before the disaster. Later it turned out that the transfer was from the person who was leaving on September 11th. Evacuation of people by water was the second largest, the first place during the Second World War. After the events of September 11th, alcohol consumption in Manhattan increased by 25%, tobacco consumption increased by 10%, and church attendance increased by 20%. During the terrorist attack, a dog named Rosalie took her blind owner down the flights of stairs to the street and took her to a friend's house. Victims of the attacks included office workers, firefighters, police officers, military personnel, and numerous citizens. Many memorials and monuments were erected in honor of the victims of the attacks in different cities of the United States and abroad. An example is Memory and Light, Padua, Italy. Many people died and suffered while helping others during evacuation and rescue, showing courage and heroism. When the National Guard went for Flight 93, 2 pilots did not have time to arm their planes. If they could intercept the plane, they would have committed suicide by crashing into the plane. Several memorials made from the wreckage of the towers have been erected around the world. Some places include Israel, Italy, and more impressively, some of the wreckage of the towers turned out to be a memorial on Mars. More than 1,100 people who worked or lived near the World Trade Center at the time of the attack were diagnosed with cancer due to exposure to toxins such as asbestos, jet fuel smoke, and carcinogens. The Maasai tribe gave 14 heads of cattle to the USA. According to the tradition of the tribe, this is considered the greatest gift. This text was voiced using Yandex Cloud Speak-to-It. Rescuers from all countries were sent to search for survivors, in the photo a French rescuer with his dog named Alsatia. At first, the terrorists wanted to send planes not to the Twin Towers, but to one of the nuclear power plants in the United States. It's good that their plan failed. A very unlucky firm lost 2/3 of its workforce. Ian Thorpe, a 5-time Olympic champion from Australia, could have become one of the victims of the terrorist attack, but miraculously escaped just a few minutes before the terrorist attacks in New York. He was doing a morning jog in Manhattan and decided to climb to the observation deck of one of the Twin Towers, but his lack of a camera stopped him. He ran to the room for a camera, and there I learned about the tragedy. Manhattan has become more polluted and behind the raised dust in the sky. It was psychologically devastating. Thousands of Americans had to move, as well as mourn the dead. It was psychologically devastating. Thousands of Americans had to move, as well as mourn the dead. This text was voiced in Yandex Cloud Speak-to-It. New Yorkers are still complaining about the dust since the terrorist attack. Myth or not, the passport of an Arab pilot, who suddenly turns out to be dead for 2 years, was lying on top of the wreckage of the building. Conspiracies are still popular to this day. There are thousands of conspiracies about this tragedy. One man managed to escape from the tower in a matter of seconds of collapse, but he later died of lung cancer. The engineers of the World Trade Center assumed that a plane could crash into the complex that would get lost in the fog. They had a prey position from past disasters. This snippet was generated in Yandex Cloud Speak-to-It. September is now celebrated as Patriots' Day to honor the memory of those who died in this terrible tragedy. In the South Tower, some might have had an escape route, but they didn't know it. The dates of the 11th of September have become a symbol of the memory of the victims, unity, and relentless fight against terrorism all over the world. 3 hours before the attack on the WUC, at Princeton University, a system called a random event generator issued a message about an imminent catastrophic event.